Hello, my friends. I'm Dennis Prager. My guest is Robert Spencer. Robert Spencer is director of Jihad Watch, a program of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, where he is a Shulman Fellow. He's the author of 18 books, including New York Times bestsellers like The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades, and so on. And by the way, those politically incorrect guides are superb. Just every single one that I have read has been terrific. Just thought I'd give that plug. Robert Spencer's latest book is The History of Jihad, from Muhammad to ISIS. His knowledge of Islam and Islamic history is remarkable, and the book is a very important one. It is up at DennisPrager.com. Robert Spencer, welcome to my show.
Great to be here, Dennis. Thank you.
So, what's different about this book from your other books and from other books written about Islamic history?
Well, neither I nor anyone else has actually ever written a history of jihad before. It sounds hard to believe, but there is no other book that is a chronological narrative history of the entire phenomenon of jihad worldwide from the 7th century to the 21st, encompassing not just the jihad against Europe, which has been written about before, and that's all in the book in great detail, but also the really shocking story of the jihad against India, which is very little known in the West and I think needs to be better known. And also the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is placed in context in this book as being part of the worldwide 14th century jihad. And 9/11, all the rest of it, this is the first time this has been done.
Let me just say that I have mentioned to my listeners, and which is one of the reasons I find your book so important. In my book, and I'm not plugging my book here, I just want to note this, though. In my book, Still the Best Hope, which is about Islamism, Americanism, and leftism, in the Islamism chapters, I noted that, and I'd like you to address this, the greatest Arab historian, some say the greatest Arab thinker who ever lived, admired universally, is Ibn Khaldun in the Middle Ages, and he wrote in his great book, the Muqaddimah, Prologue to History, Introduction to History, unlike all other religions, Islam is greater because it forces people by the sword to accept it. Am I correct?
Oh, yes, you're absolutely right. And I've quoted that in some of my other books. And really, this book now is an illustration of how Muslims have known that and have taken that seriously throughout history. And obviously, we have to add the eternal caveat. It's not all Muslims. But the book also shows that those who have not waged jihad have never risen up in any organized movement to stop those who have been waging it. And there have been throughout history for 14 centuries now, in every age, in every place, Muslims who believe that they have a responsibility before the divine being to wage war against and subjugate those who do not believe as they do and to bring them under the sway of their political system.
That's what I think Westerners don't understand, because I guess I'll put this in form of a question. If it's so obvious and so true, why is there such ignorance of this?
Well, there's, I think, an organized campaign of disinformation that is very sophisticated, and it operates on so many different levels. I mean, for example, I wrote a book about 10 years ago, The Complete Infidel's Guide to the Quran. And many, many people will say, oh, see, you're just cherry-picking verses out of the Quran. They're bad verses in the Bible, and so on. And so then you turn to Muhammad, and people say essentially the same thing. I wrote a biography, The Truth About Muhammad. And now, with the history of jihad, what I'm trying to do is counter the same kind of disinformation that comes about in regard to history, with particular emphasis on trying to change public policy. For example, Akbar Ahmed is a respected professor. He's 75 years old, laden with honors, professor at American University. He's recently written a book about Islam in Europe, full of historical whitewashes. And the obvious intent, and he even is actually quite explicit about that the purpose of his book is to get people to accept mass Muslim migration into Europe, and he's rewriting history to do so. And that's why I think most Americans have no idea of any of this, because they keep being told the opposite and keep being told untruths that are designed to get them to accept a particular political agenda.
By the way, I'm speaking, of course, to Robert Spencer. His book is The History of Jihad. It's actually published 2 days ago. It's a very important book, and it's just filled with footnotes to substantiate what he speaks of. I had a dialogue debate with the head of the Muslim Public Affairs, what is it, coalition or
Muslim Public Affairs Council?
Yeah, council. That's it. Yes, that's right. Yes, and it was very interesting. I said, and there were Muslims in the audience at a university in Southern California, and I said, the fact is, Islam has not been a religion of peace. And the reason that I mention this to you and to my audience is that if said without rancor, you could pretty much say anything. The people who really will yell at you, ironically, are the Westerners who want to do whitewashing. He said, well, he didn't fully agree, but he didn't find it, and it wasn't meant to be offensive. It was meant to just tell the truth. Islam has not been a religion of peace. It has overwhelmingly been a religion of war.
Yes.
And
there's no doubt about that.
Right. Well, but I just want people to understand you're allowed to say this you're not a Muslim hater if you say this.
Well, I have to say in this case, Dennis, that I have worked for 20-some years now without rancor, trying to be as scrupulously accurate as possible and as unemotional and not manipulative in the slightest degree in saying these things, setting out the evidence, as I do in this book, and have been labeled with all these things, all these charges. I think that the charges themselves of hating Muslims, of Islamophobia, racism, all the rest of it, they're a tactic designed to bamboozle people who are uninformed into thinking this is somebody I better stay away from.
Yes, that's right. That's why I wanted you to react, because I know it applies to you. 1-8-PRAGER-776 is the number. Robert Spencer is my guest. The other thing you mentioned that I'd also like to react to is what happened in India. And I cited this as well in my Islamism chapters in my book. And I was stunned. I was stunned by two things. One, the numbers of Hindus killed in the 1,000-year reign of Islam over India. I want to know what number you came up with. I won't say the number that I did. Number two, how it is not written about almost anywhere, including India. Would you react to both? What numbers do you have? And the non-mentioning of it in India as well as anywhere else?
Well, I have to preface by saying, of course, that we have to be a little bit cautious with the numbers because we're going back to the 7th century, and of course, reliable data in terms of the numbers is hard to come by. A lot of times these things are embellished and so on. But it does appear that it was in tens of millions, and the historian Conrad Elst, whose work is excellent about India, including the jihad against India, a Dutch historian, he has said that as many as 80 million people have been killed in jihad activity in India. And I think that as I documented in the book, the jihad against India century by century by century, and I use Muslim historians, by the way. A lot of the Mughal emperors and other emperors of the Islamic rule in India, they employed court historians, as of course they did in Europe as well. And the court historians would write the history of what was going on essentially as it happened. They were right there. And they write with great enthusiasm and great pleasure about the various Muslim emperors in India destroying thousands upon thousands of Hindu temples, carrying off the wealth, enslaving tens of thousands of people. And this happened century after century. The jihad in India was especially brutal because the Quran has a designation of the people of the book for Jews and Christians primarily, also Zoroastrians and some others. And the Hindus were not people of the book. They were very early on given this status because the people of the book can choose to be subjugated under Islamic law and denied basic rights, but they can still practice.
Right, all right, hold it there. This is really important. The book is up at DennisPrager.com, The History of Jihad. All right, everybody, I'm going to be back with Robert Spencer in a moment. The book is The History of Jihad. This man knows a great deal about the subject. That's why I'm having him on. I'd just like to remind you that Dinesh D'Souza's movie, Death of a Nation, is out. And as words like racist and fascist get tossed around to describe President Trump and Republicans, this movie asks the historical question, who were and are the real racists in America? Who were the real fascists? D'Souza's film takes you on a journey through time to answer these questions. And it unmasks the real story of slavery, segregation, racism, the party behind it. This is an educational and entertaining at the same time film. Death of a Nation. And it's out in theaters now. Just want to remind you it's PG-13, and you can get tickets. For more information or to see the trailer, go to deathofanationmovie.com, deathofanationmovie.com, Dinesh D'Souza's latest movie. All right, Robert Spencer, the author of The History of Jihad, From Muhammad to ISIS. So I had asked you about India, and you were talking about the different status that Hindus had from Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians, who could be protected if they desired to live in a second-class role and be subjugated to taxation and humiliation and all that. They're known as dhimmi. Okay, so the number you gave, the estimate of the number of Hindus over 1,000 years killed by the Muslim rulers there, you have accepted the approximate number of 80 million. That is the number I think I wrote as well, and that was from a Hindu historian. So before you get to Hindus in a lower status than Jews and Christians, tell me if you have a theory, or maybe I'm just wrong. That's a staggering number. Even if half is correct, it's staggering. Why does no one know about it?
I think no one knows about it because it's politically inexpedient for so many people for it to be known. And nowadays, even the Hindus in India and the leadership in India, they don't want this out because they have a sizable and growing Muslim minority, and they want to foster harmony between the two communities. That's a laudable goal, to be sure, but I'd never agree with people who think that it can best be achieved by accepting comfortable falsehoods. But I think that is one of the reasons why. And because there is a concerted campaign, I mentioned Akbar Ahmed before, and he's just one of these revisionist historians who are portraying Islamic history as being one of tolerance and peace and magnanimity throughout history. And that is, again, is in service of a contemporary, modern-day political agenda. But because most people don't have any idea about what is in history at all, and most Americans really, frankly, don't care about history, and they're easily manipulated in this way. There's a professor at Rutgers, Audrey Truschke, and she's written a book about Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb was one of the emperors, the Islamic rulers in India, who was viciously, violently oppressive to the Hindus, destroyed thousands of temples, and killed untold numbers of people solely because they were non-Muslim. And she portrays Aurangzeb as some sort of a 16th century Gandhi, loving and magnanimous and kind to his non-Muslim subjects. There's not a particle of truth to that. And yet she is a respected academic and is invited to speak everywhere, including in India. And I think it's because people would rather believe that, in many cases, than actually confront the reality that Aurangzeb was probably one of the greatest villains of all time and ought to be ranked up there with people like Hitler and Stalin in terms of killing people.
It's a painful realization. Why don't you define jihad?
Jihad means struggle. And there are just as many struggles in Arabic that are used, that the word jihad is applied to, as there are in English. You know, you can struggle to lose weight or quit smoking or have a great civilizational struggle, and it's the same word. The Department of the Islamic Republic of Iran, rather, they have a Department of Agricultural Jihad. It's a bureaucratic office. It doesn't mean blowing up things on the farm. It means trying to increase crop yields, the struggle to make the farms more efficient. But in Islamic law and Islamic theology, the primary meaning of jihad is warfare against unbelievers in order to establish the rule of Islamic law. And as I show in the book, this is the meaning that Muslims, great numbers of Muslims, have understood throughout history and have applied. Now, many who are listening might think, oh, no, Muhammad said that the greater jihad was the spiritual struggle, and that is a tradition within Islam. But to give you an idea of how important that is vis-a-vis the jihad that is warfare, there is a manual of Islamic law that is published by Al-Azhar University that is, of course, the place where Obama gave his great outreach to the Muslim world speech in 2009. It's the most respected institution in Sunni Islam. And Al-Azhar, in this manual of Islamic law, they devote one paragraph to the greater jihad, the inner spiritual struggle, and then 10 pages to the lesser jihad, that is warfare against unbelievers, giving the rules of war, the rules for prisoners, the spoils of war, and so on.
In your understanding, is a religious Muslim, a devout Muslim, obligated with the obvious addition of the words "when possible"? It's not always possible. Is he as obligated to bring people, if necessary by force, to Islam as to fast during Ramadan?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But it's not necessarily to make them convert, because there is that third option for the people of the book, to be subjugated.
No, I understand. That's fair. So I should have said with the exception of Jews and Christians. Fine. Who would be subjugated. Okay. So, but the obligation to wage the lesser jihad is, in your understanding of Islamic law, as obligatory as fasting on Ramadan.
But not necessarily always in a violent manner. And one of the most remarkable developments of the 21st century, as I show in the book, is the development of jihad by means of very different tactics than just warfare, and the subversion and the infiltration of the West by Islamic entities that have the same goal as violent jihad, that is to establish the hegemony of Islamic law. That is something we haven't seen in history before, but it's a really remarkably effective tactic for bringing down a foe that is vastly more powerful militarily.
Is the aim, as you understand it, is the aim to bring all societies under Sharia, or is it to make all humans Muslims? And third, I guess, question is that the same thing?
No, it's not the same thing, and the aim is indeed the first one that you noted, to bring all of society.
All right, tell me, this is very important to me. Hey, everybody, Dennis Prager here. My guest is Robert Spencer of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, the director of Jihad Watch. The History of Jihad is his book. The man is an encyclopedia of Islamic history. So, again, this is so important. So, a Muslim is obligated to engage in jihad. Jihad may be violent or nonviolent, but again, my question is what is the end purpose of jihad? Is it to bring all societies under the rule of Sharia, or is it to make everyone a Muslim, or is that the same thing?
It's to bring all societies under the rule of Sharia. It's not until the end times, according to Islamic prophecies, that everybody will become Muslim or be killed. Jesus will return, and he is going to break all the crosses, kill the pigs, and abolish the jizya, which is the tax that the people of the book pay for their subjugated status, and everybody will be Islamic or dead.
So what is I am a good person, and I am a devout Muslim. or I want to be a good person and I want to be a devout Muslim, what does it mean that I engage in jihad? What does that mean?
It can take any number of forms. There is a definite correlation that nobody wants to admit between devoutness in Islam and jihad terror activity. This doesn't mean that every devout Muslim is a jihad terrorist or will ever become one, but every jihad terrorist is a devout Muslim. And this has been hotly disputed, but it's hotly disputed on false pretenses. For example, a few years back, there was a great deal made of the fact that a couple of ISIS terrorists who had gone to Iraq from Britain ordered from Amazon the book Quran for Dummies. And people pointed to this and said, see, they don't know anything about Islam. They're trying to learn about Islam. These people aren't Muslims. Well, in reality, ISIS, the entity that they had gone to, they would hold Quran memorization contests, reward people for knowing Quran, emphasize knowing the Quran. Who knows why these men ordered this book? Maybe it was for somebody else that they knew that they were going to give it to, or maybe that they felt a deficiency in their own knowledge. But it certainly doesn't mean that jihad terrorists are not devout Muslims. To a man, they are. And we also see that there are many, many, many cases of non-devout Muslims who go through a crisis in their lives, and like so many people of all faiths, decide to grow more religious and to try to get beyond the crisis, and they ultimately turn to jihad violence. Mike Hawash is an example. He was an Intel executive out in Oregon, and he was making $360,000 a year, had a wife and kids, was very well respected in the community, and at a certain point, he after 9/11, grew his beard out, began to wear kaftan, to go to the mosque all the time, ultimately served 7 years for recruiting for Al-Qaeda. There was a young student in North Carolina, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and he was dissipating in all the ways that students in college often do. He got disgusted with himself, decided he was going to learn about his religion, bought a Quran. Ultimately, he rented an SUV and drove it onto campus to try to kill as many students as possible, running them over.
All right, let me take, I have debated this, and here is a response that many Muslims give, and that is that explain, Dennis, or not even Muslims, Westerners who defend Islam against these statements, they will say, so explain this. Why, if that's the case, why is this terror so new? Muslims weren't doing this in the 1960s, 50s, 40s, 30s, 10s. So it's new. That's their argument.
Some of the tactics are new, but one of the things that I show in the book is that terror is by no means new, that terror is as old as Islam. And I have stories from the fabled, tolerant, pluralistic Muslim Spain, where some of the rulers, Abdurrahman III, he at one point took 130 Christian prisoners out of the prison and crucified them. If that's not terror, I don't know what is. These tactics of suicide bombing, of course, were not available in the 8th century or the 9th century or the 10th century simply because the technology wasn't there. But the assassins, the famous Hashishin, would go and were trained by an Islamic imam to go and to murder specific people, usually political leaders.
All right, hold on there. We'll be back in a moment. I'm speaking to Robert Spencer, The History of Jihad. It's up at my website. I'm Dennis Prager, and I'm speaking with and to Robert Spencer. The book, History of Jihad, just came out 2 days ago, talking about the aim of jihad, and it is to bring the world under Sharia, Islamic law. But it can be waged peacefully or with violence. Is that correct? I want to summarize correctly here. Oh, I didn't put you on. That was a boo-boo. 1 second, Robert. Okay, back to you. Yes. Did I summarize it correctly?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And yet this distinction is lost on many people. A lot of, even in the government, they think, well, if they're not violent, then we can do business with them. This was the Obama understanding of the Muslim Brotherhood. But the Muslim Brotherhood is dedicated to establishing Sharia just as much as violent jihad groups are. They just are generally, not even universally, nonviolent. And so many people were saying, see, these people are moderates, we can play ball with them, completely ignoring the fact that they had exactly the same goal as the violent jihadis.
Right. I want to make clear to people that's the issue. The issue is Sharia. If Muslims simply wanted everybody to believe in Allah and the Quran and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, that would not be a problem. Tell me if you agree with me. The problem is that the aim is to have us all governed by a totalitarian system.
Oh, yeah, that is exactly it. Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, he said, first you invite the unbelievers to accept Islam. If they refuse it, you invite them to pay the jizya, which is the tax that is signifies the dhimmi status, the second-class status. And if they refuse both, then seek Allah's help and fight them. And when you fight them, you are fighting to either bring them into Islam or dhimmitude. Maududi, Sayyid Abu Allah Maududi was a Pakistani politician and Islamic scholar in the 20th century. He died in 1979. And he wrote that non-Muslims have absolutely no right to wield the reins of power in any part of God's earth. And if they do, the Muslims have the obligation to dislodge them from that power by any means possible.
So again, for the sake of clarity, I would like to draw a distinction here. The Christian aim is that everyone come to Christ. The Muslim aim is that everybody come to Allah and Muhammad. So one might argue, what's the difference? Christians want everybody Christian, Muslims want everybody Muslim. But there is a difference, and the difference is if everybody becomes Christian, you don't have a government enforcing Christian law. Because there isn't Christian law to enforce to begin with, as there is with Sharia, which governs every part of life. Is that a fair distinction?
Absolutely, yes. Most people do not realize that Islam, besides being a religion, is a political system. And that political system it bills itself as being the only legitimate political system for all of the earth. And it's an authoritarian, supremacist, violent, aggressive, and expansionist political system, and consequently it threatens every other political system.
Right. So so that's the Sharia really is the difference. So now I don't know your opinion on this. This will interest me greatly. There are a handful of Muslims, or maybe more than a handful, who are trying to reform Islam. And in my way of thinking, there's one thing that needs to be reformed overwhelmingly, and that is the goal of everybody being governed by Sharia. If Sharia were personal, in other words, I'm a Muslim, I want to govern my life by Muslim law, that's fine. Can a Muslim, in your opinion, a devout Muslim, say we will keep Sharia, or we will transform Sharia into personal law and not seek to make it societal?
Sharia is a unified whole, and the personal law that governs Islamic religious observance is part of it, as well as the material about how a society is to be governed. It's not separable. And so people, they would be accused by their fellow Muslims, and are accused by their fellow Muslims, of having abandoned Sharia and thus having abandoned Allah and Islam, because they are actually rejecting what is part of Sharia.
So it's the reform that I just mentioned is, in your view, impossible.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say it's impossible, because history is full of so many things nobody ever expected. But I don't see how it could possibly work. And it's very difficult to see a way forward for a non-literal understanding of the Quran to become paramount, when the Quran itself says that the religion is perfected in chapter 5, verse 3. How do you reform what's perfect? And the reformers also have been persecuted as heretics and executed as a result throughout Islamic history.
Is there a way a devout Muslim can condemn Islamic terror?
Well, it's very difficult because you're talking about people who are waging jihad for the sake of Allah, which is something that is greatly
all right,
rewarded.
but what is... Okay, forgive me. But what is the jihadi end if the end is bring the world under Sharia? How is that...
a devout Muslim can't condemn that.
Okay, no, I know. So this is my question. Can't a devout Muslim say, yes, we want everybody to accept Sharia, whether through force or through voluntary conversion, but you're mowing down Frenchmen with an SUV in Nice, France, doesn't further that? Can a devout Muslim say that? We'll be back in a moment. Robert Spencer is my guest. The book is The History of Jihad, and it is up at DennisPrager.com.
Whatever may come, the world keeps revolving. They say the next big thing is here.
All right, everybody. Dennis Prager here. Robert Spencer is my guest. The History of Jihad is his book. And I'm glad we have a devout Muslim calling in from Orange County, California. Zia, thank you for calling. You're on with Robert Spencer, and I'm Dennis Prager. Hi.
Hi, Dennis. First, I want to thank you because I'm a long-time listener of you for probably 20 or 25 years.
Wow.
I'm in sales. I drive all day, and I listen to you, and you have made me to be a better Muslim. You enhanced my religion. So I want to thank you first, and
thank you.
It's an honor to be talking to you. But I'm a devout Muslim. I pray 5 times a day, and I condemn violence done by the name of Islam. I mean, based on my understanding from Quran, you can't hurt anybody, and you're supposed to be living in peace amongst your people you live in. And then what your guest was saying that around Prophet's time, Prophet never had any offensive war against anybody. Most of the wars at the beginning were all defensive. And as long as the history that I know, the Prophet lived with all the Jews and Christians in peace and loved with them and brought them and invited them in the mosque to share the mosque with them. So it was a very peaceful coexisting. And I think my opinion, because I've lived in the United States for the past 30-some years, and the major issues that have come up is because of the religion that was twisted and tweaked by the Wahhabism created by Saudi Arabia in the past 35 years. That has really, really caused a lot of problems.
Zia, by the way, where are you originally from?
I'm from Afghanistan.
Okay, great.
I was born in Afghanistan.
All right.
Came in 1980 when the Soviet. I love you
yes.
because you're the person who fought communism. So I love you.
Yes, I did a lot for Afghanistan. It didn't work out, unfortunately.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate all
okay, thank you. Please respond. You don't have a lot of time. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, unfortunately, Muhammad actually encountered 3 Jewish tribes in Medina. He exiled 2 of them and massacred the 3rd. Then he went to the oasis of Khaybar, where the 2 tribes that he had exiled were, and massacred them. And he tried to wage war against the Christians of the Byzantine Empire, but didn't find them there when he went. And later on, of course, his followers poured out of Arabia into the Middle East and North Africa in clearly offensive wars and conquered and Islamized the entire region. Throughout history, Muslims have waged jihad violence, as I show in the book. This is not because they all misunderstood Islam. This is because violence is enshrined in the core text. The Quran says, kill them wherever you find them 3 times. Chapter 2, verse 191, 489, and 95.
Robert Spencer's book is The History of Jihad. I thank you, Zia. I thank you as well. I'd like to have a wonderful dialogue between the 2 of you. One day we'll do that. I'm Dennis Prager. Thank you for listening.
The Dennis Prager Show, live from the Relief Factor Pain-Free Studio.